So let's jump to this idea of shared styles. I've used some of these as I was kind of just putting together the workshop, because like doing it myself and manually having to like change all the colors seemed terrible. And you can kind of see some of them that I've used as I'm going through this. Like I have this idea that's not just the hex value, but I have theoretically a set of colors that I had predetermined that I could just pick from, right? Wherever you work, there's probably like a primary brand color, right? Like, you know, Twilio's was red, SendGrid's was blue, so on and so forth, or is for both those cases. And so you have these like colors and this palette, so you're not just kind of like guessing at the hex code or copying and pasting it, right? This idea that we would want to have some shared styles in this case. You can create shared styles for really any of the following colors, right? So we want to use our brand blue, our primary button color blue probably, so on and so forth. Text, and you'll notice that we treat a text style and a color separately, right? This means that you can like have different font weights and typography, but you can also have text be different colors. They're kind of two separate things. You can take a given piece of text, you can set, you know, what font, what size, what weight, and the color as two independent styles. That might feel a little tedious, but generally speaking, it's better. You can also take those cool shadows that you perfectly honed in, as we joked about in the previous section, and save that. So you can just like, okay, cool, use like the shadow that I use for everything as we go through. Layout grids, which we haven't discussed yet, you can also save those, right? Because theoretically, like, there's probably, for whatever app you're working on, like one 12-column grid that you're using all over the place. You probably don't have that many different grids that you're using throughout your application. You might have more than one, but probably not bespoke ones all over the place, right? And so you can kind of take any of these things and save them into kind of like effectively variables or saved values and apply them to different objects as you kind of go along. And that's useful because then, like, as soon as we kind of take this from being a hard-coded color and associate it with like, okay, primary button blue, right? Or warning red, or what have you, and then you're like, we're changing the brand, right? We're no longer a blue company, we're purple now. You're like, hopefully in your CSS or your Sass or whatever, you had a CSS variable or something along those lines, and you just change the value and you're good. Ideally, for your designs, you would love the same thing. I want to change all the buttons. Everything that references the brand color, I want to change it all, right? And we can definitely do that. So let's talk about how to do it manually. And then one of my favorite like quotes is Larry Wall, who is the creator of Perl, everyone's favorite programming language, right? But his quote is that like the three most important virtues of a programmer are laziness, impatience, and hubris, right? And like I said before, if something is tedious, you should probably not do it like that. So we're going to set one style, because a lot of times, yeah, I just need to set one thing. I need to store this value. I need to use it. But like, could you, this is even a very limited color palette, right? I didn't even do like the normal like 50, 100, all the way to 900. I even stopped at 500 here and only did 5 of every color. Could you make these colors one by one? Of course you could. Do you want to? No, you don't want to. So we'll look at how to automate that in a second. One of the questions that I really loved in the chat is, wouldn't it be awkward if we name something primary blue and then it's now purple? Yes, right? This is the one thing I learned from people who work on design systems for a living and designers, is that typically, not just your primary color, but like you tend to not name the colors that are kind of meaningful in your application by the color, right? So for instance, if like your primary buttons were all blue and now they're purple, you call it primary button blue, that's going to be awkward for forever, right? A lot of times you just call it primary. Like we give them meanings, and if we ever change the like colors for those meanings, and I mostly took this from like console error versus console warning, right, as the inspiration. But yeah, like normally you name it after their meaning, and then you can change the color depending on what you need to do in that case. Brand especially, right? Like generally speaking, there are some connotations to the colors, like green means go, red means stop most of the time. But brand colors might change, acquisitions happen, executives change their mind, stuff happens, right? So we tend to not name them after the colors. This is not an official design advice. This is my personal opinion that you're going to get, even though you didn't ask for it. I mean, technically, there's a question. I can vaguely use that. Like what I tend to do is for like my actual UI, I'll have these like warning, danger, success, information, brand, right? But then in my general library, like sometimes orange means a warning or a danger or whatever. Sometimes I want something to be orange. I don't want to, like, if I wanted a given div to be orange for a given reason, I don't want to have to be like, cool, it's actually going to be warning 200 when it doesn't mean a warning, right? So for my just general color palette that I have like saved in my team library that we'll look at later, I tend to name them after colors. And then as I'm like putting down the basis of like the design that I'm working on, I will then attribute those colors to their meanings and use the meaning in the actual UI, right? But we're going to do it with the actual names that are not signifying any color. So again, if we change the brand eventually to purple or whatever, hot pink, you can just change that and it's still the brand color. None of your like CSS code changes, right? And none of your design tokens change either as well. Because yeah, if you use that name as a variable in your code, now you have the problem in both places. And nobody wants that. All right, so let's just talk about how to make a shared style. And then we'll talk about how to do it at scale. So let's say hypothetically, I had a bunch of these modals, right? In fact, let's go ahead. I'm going to grab this. I'm going to make, actually, let's get it in place. Let's do this first, and then I'll make a bunch of copies. OK, so I've got, if I select this frame here, you see I got basically two shades of like a cornflower blue. There's the Crayola box I had as a kid, all coming back to me now. That was the button that lets me select everything that is that color. But what's this other one? Oh, these four little like dots. That obviously means style. I can click that. And you probably, if you're just using Figma for the first time, I think it just gives you like fuchsia and another color in there. I will show you how to like change this and update this later. But you can theoretically pick from a color that you have in your palette. The chat says iris is the other one. Fuchsia and iris come by default. So you can go in here and you can pick one of these colors, or you can take the current color, hit the plus button, and you can give it a name. So I could name it like, let's call it cornflower blue, even though we said we weren't doing that. We're going to delete this style in a second. Cornflower blue, create style. And now you can see instead of the hex code, it is cornflower blue. And since I'm going to delete these, what's the other like quip? Like the hardest things in computer science are naming things, cache invalidation, off by one errors, the two hardest things. Darker blue. All right, so I've got those two, and we got that white, but we're not going to deal with it. So I can grab this, and now they all reference these two styles that I just made. Whoa. Go ahead and make another one here. We'll zoom out just slightly. Move that sticky over. And now, let's say I was using these colors all throughout my design, across all these pages, so on and so forth. I can actually go ahead and either if I go to the Inspect tab when I have nothing selected, or the Design tab when I have nothing selected, I can see here are all my styles. So I can say, OK, this blue, I'm going to hit these two little sliders here. And guess what? We're going to be this kind of fuchsia-ish, purplish. You can see that that changed across all of them, right? And we can do the same for the darker blue. Let's pick something obnoxious. Let's do like a lime green. Right, and they can change across everything. Yeah?
Does Figma give you color contrast by default?
Figma does not. There are plugins that you can install that will kind of like let you select a given. I use Stark. I think it's not free, but there's a bunch of free ones as well, where you can like give a selection and it will give you like the AA and AAA ratings for everything as well, and you can kind of adjust that and figure it all out. Okay, so that's how we make one style, and I can do that for like individual things one by one, right? That sounds tedious, right? I say it sounds tedious because before I like learn this technique, that's what I did for a while, and I don't ever want to do it again. So let me save you that, and we'll kind of talk about how to handle this.